The new Galaxy Z Flip 5 is all about the cover display, or as Samsung's calling it, the flex window. Well, that, and it's also about the hinge. The hinge is the other big improvement here, but those two things are really what's going to make this phone substantially different from the Z Flip 4. Now, I had some hands-on time with this phone prior to launch, and I have some thoughts on it, both positive and negative. But let's start off with just the basics. What are we talking about here? Well, this is one of two foldy guys launched by Samsung. One being the book style, the Z Fold 5, and the other one being this one, the clamshell, the Z Flip 5. Not an especially new concept as we saw it last year. But the cover display, the flex window, Samsung's calling it, is now substantially larger, covering almost the entirety of the phone when it's folded in half. It's now 3.4 inches, and it has Gorilla Glass Victus 2, as well as obviously armor aluminum around the side. So a lot of the similar build materials that we see in the S23 lineup. In addition, it's a little boxier, and it kind of matches the aesthetic of the Samsung lineup for 2023. The cover display does have a lot of new functionality on there, so not like before it was always just like a little tiny 1.5, 2 inch display or whatever, and it felt a lot more like a smartwatch. Now, it still feels a little bit like a smartwatch, but it's way bigger, and there are more than a dozen new widgets. You can use a full keyboard on there. You have a bigger window for selfies, or if you're taking photos of other people, a bigger window that they can see themselves and pose properly. But those are just some of the basics. Of course, you can also get some other apps on there, but not all other apps. So if you go into the Labs feature, you can kind of use some apps, like you can use WhatsApp, Google Maps, and some other things, but it's not, from what I can tell, like every app out there is going to work there. There is similar navigation, like I said, to the Galaxy Watch, which is nice for a smaller display. I think this would be used more like a watch, great for notifications, great for like at a glance, maybe Google Maps, maybe like Spotify controls, things like that. And so that navigation feels like it makes sense. Swiping down for your quick settings, swiping through like your tiles to kind of see like the weather and your calendar and things like that, it all like makes sense. But the larger display makes it interesting because one of the benefits of the folding phone before, one of the big value propositions to me was that I was less likely to be distracted by my phone. I didn't have to have my phone sitting there and like a very obvious distraction. Instead, I could see notifications or you know, some basic things without actually like going into my phone and having the temptation of Instagram or TikTok or whatever. Instead, it was a much more deliberate opening of the phone to actually do that. Now, apparently I am a little bit in the minority there, and most people just wanted this phone because it looked cool. And so the larger display on the front makes it look more cool. And in that aspect, it's a win. But even if you do share my perspective and you want to use this phone to kind of limit your social media usage while still showing you notifications, I don't think the larger display is especially bad for that. Like, yes, you can use some apps on there, but it's really an unpleasant experience to use. Like, I couldn't imagine using TikTok on here. I don't think that would be like an ideal environment for that, so you'd probably just open the phone anyway. So in that sense, I think it also accomplishes both tasks, and I think the larger display is probably a positive. It definitely is a positive. It is, however, a notch display instead of a dual hole punch display like we saw in the Razr. I'll talk more about that a little bit later, but the rest of the phone, of course, the hinge, that's a really big deal here. The hinge now folds totally flat, so you don't have like that kind of gap down by the hinge and like a taper from the wider to the narrower part when it's closed. Instead, totally folds flat, very parallel sides. Less dust is going to get in there. It's more compact. It's not going to get hung up on your pocket quite as much, being probably about like 15 to 20% thinner on the hinge side. And you have fewer moving parts in this teardrop hinge that should give you better durability and better longevity of the hinge, which I think is obviously a big positive, being that many people who see this phone for the first time are skeptical of the longevity. So at least now, I mean, it always was pretty durable for a long time, but at least now they are improving that even more. This is still IPX8, so technically no dust resistance, plenty of water resistance, but no dust resistance, even though like you do have a fold flat hinge. So I think that still is an improvement in the dust perspective here compared to the last one. Under the hood, we have the same processor as the Z Fold 5, the S23, the 23 Plus, the Ultra, like all the new Samsung phones. It's the Snapdragon Gen 2 Samsung edition, which is a pretty fast, pretty reliable processor. Along with that, there are quite a few things that are similar on this phone to what we saw on last year's Z Flip 4. And this is kind of a common theme between this phone and the Z Fold 5. There's a lot of parallels from last year, a lot of shared design elements like the cameras, the fingerprint sensor, and things like that. But looking at them one by one, as I mentioned, the fingerprint sensor on the side is still there. That would make sense to me because you want to unlock it when it's closed or open, so an under-display fingerprint sensor doesn't make sense. On the side, feels nice. We also still have a dual camera setup with the exact same cameras as we had last year, being a 10 megapixel selfie lens, a 12 megapixel main lens, and a 12 megapixel ultrawide lens. So the combination of those, like obviously slightly lower megapixel count than other cameras out there, but megapixels aren't everything. A lot of it is based on processing, but like zooming in is going to be a weakness of this phone. Obviously, you're buying the phone because it folds. The cameras, you could find better cameras out there from a non-folding phone, but again, and it doesn't fold. The cameras here do actually have a lot of interesting use cases, being that it folds, and I've talked about that in the past with other flip phones like this. Specifically, you can use it for a tripod, you could use it for video calls, and like not always have to prop your phone up, it props itself up. The design of this phone is also a little bit boxier, so even though we're having a similar interior display and similar dimensions across the board, it's a little bit boxier, like I said, so it matches the rest of the lineup. And getting back to that larger outer display, I was thinking about where that could be useful, and of course, once I have more time to test it, I will make an updated video with, you know, my long-term review on this, and if you want to see that, be sure to click that subscribe button below. But I was thinking about where you could use that. I think you could use it like an always-on display kind of. You could have it propped up in a tent setting, maybe like on your desk, and it would show like Spotify or something like that. I think it would also be nice to have a larger display for those at-a-glance moments when you want to see like the weather, the UV index, the calendar, whatever, some simple things like that. The little display before was a little bit small, and so sometimes even then I found myself opening the phone to see those things just because it was easier to see them. So larger outer display kind of fixes that in my mind. But I do still have some concerns with this phone. Even though they upgraded to USB 3.2, which allows video output, great, there's still no Samsung DeX. I'm not really sure why they decided to omit that. We have the same processor, we have a lot of the same things that seems like you could have DeX on there, but they don't have that. And the second concern is that the biggest competition here is going to be the Razr, which does have a desktop mode. It has a bigger outer display with dual hole punch, and it has more apps available on the outer display. Of course, there are some downsides there. It's not like a Galaxy, and there are plenty of benefits in being a Galaxy phone here, but you're gonna have some stiff competition there. In general, I think the highlight of this phone is going to be that it works a lot like a regular candy bar phone, like an iPhone, for example, but it folds in half. So you have that cool novelty, that party trick, and you can do a couple extra things like set it up in tripod mode or tent mode, and use the outer display. Like, it's gonna be a cool, fun phone, but it's not gonna be for anybody who's searching for massive productivity or extra value in their phone. Those are obviously going to be more power users that want an S Pen, that want DeX, that want everything else that you get with, for example, the Galaxy Fold 5. So you'd obviously be buying a Fold 5. This comes in 4 different colors. We have graphite, cream, lavender, and mint, and it's selling for $999, which is, again, very competitive. And I think of all the folding phones, this is the one you're most likely to see most on the streets. Like, people are gonna buy it just because it's cool, and it's the same price as pretty much any other phone. So those are my first impressions of the Galaxy Z Flip 5. I'm excited to see this bigger screen in action and start to really use my own apps on there, but of course I will have that full video coming as soon as possible. In the meantime, you can check out my video on the Galaxy Z Fold 5, as well as the 2 watches that were launched, the Galaxy Watch 6 and the 6 Classic. So check out those videos, and I'll see you over there.